All right, everybody, what's good? This is Dr. Nee with my crappy webcam in a hotel. What's up, Dr. Renee? How you doing?
Your webcam is definitely crappy.
Yo, I think it's broken actually, because if I turn the light off, there's these lines. It looks like the Matrix type lines.
Yeah.
And this is the webcam that I've had for at least, I say the last 6 years. I don't use it much anymore, but when I'm on the road, this is the one I use. And then I try not to do interviews while I'm on the road anymore, mainly because I'm
Right.
just not in the office and so forth. But we here. This is where we at.
This is what we got.
Hey, everyone, what's good? This is Dr. Nee. We got Dr. Renee on here, and this is another episode of Docs Outside the Box. So, as you guys heard earlier, I'm on a locum stint. I'm in a hotel. Renee's at home doing her Docs Outside the Box business thing. And, as I'm on locums, I'm actually in a rural location. That's one of the reasons why I like doing locums for trauma is it's really a great opportunity to help rural communities out, as well as suburban communities also, as they build their trauma centers up. And it also gives me the most flexibility. I don't know if anybody knows, but trying to do locums in an inner city urban area, it can be kind of difficult. It can be really difficult trying to find positions and stuff. And definitely the leverage that you have in the city area compared to a rural area, I think is night and day.
You ain't got it.
Yeah,
And there is no leverage.
exactly.
You are not a hot commodity. You are literally just, a dime a dozen.
Yeah. I'm actually interested if anybody's listening and you've done locums in like New York City, Atlanta, Phoenix. What are some other big cities? Like major cities.
Chicago.
Let me know, because I'm very fascinated to hear what kind of options you have when you're working in a big city. And I'd like to compare that to like the options that you have when you're in a smaller rural area and
Yeah.
find out what the pay differences are. And just even some of the BS that you may have to put up with being in a city area. For real, for real.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
No, I mean, I agree with you. I actually had a discussion yesterday with a doc who is in the DMV area. She's looking to do locum. She just recently got out of private practice, and she was basically saying, she's like, they're not paying out here.
Yeah.
And I said, well, it depends on a number of things, right? Like, so let's, talk specialty and location and, scope of work. It depends on a number of things, but definitely your location is going to make a difference, because in one market, like I said, you could be a hot commodity. Like they could absolutely need somebody because there's nobody willing to go where where they're asking you to go. But if you're in an inner city like New York, and I think I've told my story on the podcast before that, I've literally had to say to a recruiter who was trying to recruit me to a hospital in Brooklyn, you can't afford me, because they just were not paying, like the amount of work I would have to do for the little amount of pay that they were going to give. It just wasn't worth the hassle. But
Yeah.
what
Yeah,
do
I
they
think-
care? Because they could just find another doc who will take
Yeah.
it. So
And I think eventually we're going to have an episode where we talk about the best ways, or what options do you have available to you when you're negotiating contracts, whether it's an employee contract or if you're working as an independent contractor, just realizing what's at stake, what you can talk about, and what's on the table. We should do that on a future
Right,
episode.
right.
But the reason I was talking about working in rural neighborhoods is I work in a rural neighborhood. At times you work at a rural/suburban hospital. But the next guest on the show, his name is Dr. John Schutfeld. He is an ER physician, and he actually leads a staffing company on an indigenous property or indigenous land or reservation, whichever way you want to describe it. But basically, he's on lands that are for Native Americans, and he leads this ER staffing company. And they provide, obviously, ER physicians. They provide critical care. They provide other hospital management services to these hospitals that provide like really critical services to Native American populations, which is extremely, extremely needed, and is a big deal.
yeah.
And the name of his company that he leads is called Tribal EM. And this is not the first company that he's led. This is not the first company that he's created. He's actually created several companies and he sold them off. One of them actually got bought out by Walmart. So he's rolling with the big boys.
Wow.
He's
Seriously, Walmart.
He's rolling with the big boys. And I'm really interested. The reason I wanted him on the show is not really to talk about oh, well, I've started all these businesses and here's my life, but to actually talk about what it's like starting and being a part of this organization that is working on indigenous lands, because that's really important. I think that's the mission part of the show.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What it's like to get doctors even out to these lands. Some of them have to be flown out by fixed wing airplane, by helicopter, because that's how, secluded these places are.
Spoiler alert.
Right. But also at the same time, I wanted to hear about what it's like, or what's his advice for doctors who want to start a business but are trying to balance clinical medicine and seriously wanting to scale their business, because he's done it several times.
Right.
Right. It's more than just a side hustle and you're kind of doing this until, you kind of figure you're going to blow up. This is literally for doctors who are like, look, like I got this great idea and I need someone to help me grow this and scale this. How do I do this? And I asked them these questions on the show.
Oh, nice. Now,
Yeah.
that's going to be really interesting, because I think a lot of docs listening want to know how they could potentially do that too. Because it's a little bit daunting, working in whatever setting that you're working as a physician, but then realizing that you do have a great idea and that it really could blow up. But if you don't really know how to do it, how to go about it, you might just end up sitting on it and then it just never comes to fruition.
Exactly,
So,
because there's having the idea and then there's scaling the idea.
Right.
And those are not the same,
Yeah.
tool set, mindset, and so forth. So I asked them about that. I want you guys to check out the show notes to learn more about Dr. John Shufelt. But without further ado, let's jump right into this show. I think this is going to be a really good episode. Let's jump right into it.
let's do it.
Hey, Dr. John Shufelt, how you doing? Welcome to Docs Outside the Box.
Thanks. Happy to be here. This will be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. Listen, I'm going to do my introductions later on, but listen, you are John Shufelt, MD, JD, MBA, literally a alphabet soup after your name, and that's really exciting and dope, as well as being CEO or founder of a whole bunch of very successful businesses. So we're here to get some knowledge from you, as well as understand what it's like for us physicians who are looking to get into entrepreneurship. We may not be at step 100 where you're at, right? And obviously you did all the hard work to get to that point, but we want to know what it's like, to take steps 1 and 2 with you still having that knowledge, that acceptability. So listen, let's jump into it. You already have a helicopter in your background, so I want to jump to it and ask you, is it true when you started your locums company or started your staffing company that you used to fly your own helicopter and help ER doctors get to these facilities?
Yeah, so we'd fly people around in fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters, and I would ferry, I had a program where I would ferry specialists up to one of the tribal hospitals we worked at. So on one or two Friday mornings a month, I would occasionally take some specialists up there if the regular service couldn't do it. But I've been flying helicopters for almost 30 years.
You still fly?
Airplanes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was out yesterday.
Really, really. So listen, for everyone who's listening, Dr. John Shufelt, he is CEO of an organization that I really think is great. It's called Tribal Health. It is an ER staffing company that works mainly on indigenous lands, Native American communities, but it's more than just your average staffing company. It's also medical management or hospital management. Can you tell us more about this organization, this health organization, the mission, and what that means between just a staffing company and hospital management?
Yeah, you bet. So I started, almost by accident. I was asked to be the chief medical officer in the 638 hospital, and that means the tribe under this thing called the 638 Self-Determination Act takes over the care of their own members from IHS. And they built a brand new hospital, needed a CMO. I'd had that role a couple times before, but never on indigenous lands. And went up there, helped them get Joint Commission accredited, and literally fell in love with the people and the place and the mission. And when you're working on indigenous lands, you see that these poor folks are resilient as hell, and they've had everything stacked against them. And so I've literally been honored to help care for them, because I think we need to right this wrong. And so now we staff about 30 different tribes in the country, 30 different healthcare facilities, some of them then in the emergency department, but also in clinics, OB, nurses, doctors, NPs, PAs, kind of the whole gamut of healthcare staffing, about 300 people across the country. So it's really been the best thing I've done in healthcare. And I still practice. I was in the emergency department all weekend. But I really love helping out our indigenous forebears.
So that first job that you did where you were CMO of this hospital, this is a failing hospital, I'm assuming. What was that like? Tell me what it was like. What was the issue that was the problem? And then how did you take it to something that was very successful and then start to scale after that?
Well, it actually wasn't failing; it was a startup, and I've certainly been in the failing institutions, or I would say the struggling institutions, and realistically, it's about building, having the right people in there with the right motivations, kind of mission driven, clear expectations and objectives, and then using kind of metric driven management. Here's where we are. Here's where we need to get to. Here's our plan. Let's execute, and then frequent follow ups. It's not rocket science, but if you have people that care, it's certainly a lot easier. In the past, one of the things I realized that a lot of folks were kind of up there for the paycheck, which is fine, but we try to find mission-driven people who really want to go up there and help and be of service, and I think that was a big change.
So one thing you mentioned is people being up there for a check, right? I know that obviously with an ER staffing company, there are people right now who are listening who want to be involved with that, right? But tell us the difference, because going to indigenous lands, going to a Native American community, practicing there is way different than your average ER physician locums job. So tell us what's the difference that they're going to see when they go to this position.
So I love working up on indigenous lands in the emergency department. I trained at a big level 1. I work at a big level 1 right now. We have literally every specialist you can imagine with every service you can imagine. But you're in these IHS hospitals or 638 hospitals, you better bring your A game. Your diagnostic skills better be up to par, because sometimes they don't have ultrasound. Sometimes they don't have CT. They don't have overreads. And, we have our providers doing things they probably haven't done since residency or just read about, because there's a lot of trauma up on indigenous lands, and you see a lot of sick folks. Certainly when COVID hit, I was out in the Navajo reservation helping them on this critical care response team. And, we were screening and looking at north of 300 patients a day who were coming through their system.
So when you're at these facilities, or if someone is at these facilities, how far is the next, I guess, so to speak, help, so to speak? How far is the next biggest hospital or the next biggest city that they could be sent to, so people understand how rural they are?
Well, sometimes it's only 90 miles away. But sometimes it's much farther. And, what we face with now, and for you folks listening, this well, the hospital might be 90 minutes away, but there are no beds there. So we're transferring patients from South Dakota literally to Idaho, all over the country, because there are no beds there, because South Dakota was hit very hard with COVID. And so although help may be close, getting them out of there is tough. So, we'll have patients boarding the emergency department for north of 24 hours who are critically ill because there's no other place to send them. Now, that's gotten a lot better, but certainly in the peak, it was a challenging place to practice. And that's what I mentioned. You've got to be up there. It's a great place to practice. You use all your ED skills, all your emergency medicine skills, but it's not for the faint of heart. You've got to bring your A game, whether you're a general surgeon, an OB-GYN, or a nurse or a doc.
How long is an average assignment for someone who goes to this place? How long will they plan to be there on average?
People, it's kind of as long or as short as they want. If it's under 3 days, it may not be worth their time and effort. But most people go from 5 to 14 days in a row. And then they'll take, 10 days, 14 days off, and then come back and do it again. It sounds weird, but these places are addicting to work at. You literally get away from there, and there's something about it. I'm old, I've been doing this for 31 years, but I get away from there, and I'm like, I can't wait to go back. There's something about the mission and the people and what you're doing to help an entire community. It's very fulfilling, very addicting.
So Tribal Health started, looking at the website, 2015.
Correct.
And then I'm looking at your other companies that you've started. You've started an urgent care company in 1993, as
right.
well as you started MeMD. So let's take a step back. Let's talk about the spectrum of starting urgent care, going from that transition to where you are MD to where you are now with Tribal Health. And I'm sure you probably got some other things going on. What was because that's a different mindset, right? It's almost like serial entrepreneurship. Talk to us about that.
So I've had, probably 20 businesses, and I think I've had 13 exits. And some of them are pretty small exits, less than $1 million, and some of them are kind of large exits. Knock
When
on wood.
when you say exit, what does that mean? You mean like you got bought out,
Sale.
or you sell
Yeah.
it? You sold it? Okay, is
So,
that a
yeah.
good thing or a bad thing? Just so we know, because some of us don't understand that
Oh,
lingo.
I'm sorry. It was a good thing. So these are
Okay.
companies that I wanted to, I put up for sale, or someone came in and did the Godfather and an office, an offer you can't refuse, and allowed me to go do something else. So the first real big medical one was NextCare, and that was in 1993. Started as a single urgent care, and in Phoenix, there weren't really any urgent cares in Phoenix, and very few in the country at that point. But I grew that to about 60 centers in 17 years, and then started another one right after that called Doctors Express, which was an urgent care franchise. And when I say I started it, that's a misnomer. I actually bought it with another group, and we grew Doctors Express and sold that to American. I exited before this, but sold it to American Family Care. But about 10 days after leaving NextCare, I started MeMD, which was a very early virtual health provider, and recently sold that to Walmart in June of this year.
Congratulations. So you're starting
Thanks.
this in 2010. Like, this is really before like broadband is really like accepted as, virtual, well, at least the ability to have like video be as, what's the word I want to say, as consistent
Ubiquitous.
and ubiquitous as it is right now, right? So, and has there ever been a point where clinically that has gotten in the way of you starting a business? Talk to us about that mindset, because it just seems like you're always looking for a new solution, right? Which is positive, and then you execute on it and you're very successful on it. Talk to us about how that works between clinical medicine and what you're doing as an entrepreneur.
Well, so I'd have to back up a little bit. I have not been always super successful at these things. I've had a ton of failures along the way.
Good. Let's hear about that. That's what we like to hear too, because sometimes we can learn just as much from our failures as our successes.
I generally learn more from the failures. So I'll give you a relatively large one. So I started a company called Healthy Bid, and it was probably 2013. And it was a reverse auction for healthcare. So, for example, you're a surgeon, and someone says, "Hey, I was told I need my gallbladder out. I want to get it done in the next month or so. I don't have acute cholecystitis. Here's my health plan. I want to do it within 50 miles. What do you bid?" And so they'd send the bid out to surgery centers around the area, and they would call back and say, "Look, Tuesday mornings are pretty slow for us generally. We'll give you a discount." And so that was the premise of this. And we built the system, engaged some surgeons and other people. It was for all elective procedures, plastics, dental, radiology, imaging, everything you guys are thinking of. And it was probably just a little early, and probably poor execution on my part. But it was a little bit early in the sense that a lot of physicians were like, "Well, why would I ever do this? Because I have enough patients now." And so we ended up shutting it down after about 18 months, but built it and tried to scale it. There was just very little pickup. Consumers liked it because they could see the quality of the surgeons and other people that were kind of bidding on their procedures, but it just did not get wide acceptance. And now I know there's groups trying to do the same thing. The timing's probably better for them. So I was probably a little early, probably poor execution.
Mm-hmm. I've heard you say that on another podcast before, because we will have docs who are doing either a side business or jumping into full entrepreneurship. It may fail, and oftentimes they think it's a bad idea. But oftentimes I hear you say that a lot of it is because of bad execution. So talk to us about that, the difference between execution versus a bad idea.
So, it's kind of funny. If you go back and look at a lot of successful startups that are hyper successful now, people tried to probably talk the founders out of doing them because it was just way early. And the founders had resilience and tenacity and just had an idea. And I always call it seeing around the corner of where the world was going to and getting there before them. So that's the old Henry Ford statement. If people asked me what they wanted, the answer would have been a faster horse, not a car, because no one saw how the automobile would revolutionize the world. And so there's a lot of things where you may be too early, it may be a dumb idea. And I think, coming up with your MVP, your minimum viable product, and testing it out on people is a great way to dip your toe in the water without really fully committing, and doing it while you're still practicing medicine. As you all know, shift work in emergency medicine and critical care and some other specialties, it's much easier to start a business than if you're a full-time internist or a CT surgeon who's in the hospital 6 and 7 days a week. When I would go back to school, I'd always go back and get a full-time MBA, a full-time JD degree, and some other education I've done, because I just scheduled my shifts around my education. And same with the businesses. I was able to kind of run the business on the weekdays and work in the ED on the weekends or late in the evenings. And so it all seemed to work. As far as the execution goes, I think if you sit down and, put together your one-page business plan, and I talk about this in, the book I wrote, Entrepreneurs RX. You put together your one-page business plan.
And just to clarify, because everybody always think when they think about a business plan, they think about like a 50-page document.
Oh, God.
So you're doubling down. So all you need is a one-page business plan. Okay, let's hear about this.
And if you Google one-page business plan, and I talk about it in this book, but it gives you the high points of what you're trying to accomplish, the risks and benefits, who's your team, what sort of money you'll need. And it allows you to, again, iterate along the way. So, now when I start a business, I may do a minimum viable product first and see if it gets any sort of user acceptability. And then as it does or doesn't, I change it as I go. And it's a very quick, fast turnaround process. It's not everything you can have a minimum viable product. If you're doing a drug or device, obviously, those aren't really suitable for minimum viable products, trying to get them through the FDA.
Minimum viable product, real quick, for those who are listening, what is that?
So, for example, if you were starting a telemedicine business today, you may want to start it using a HIPAA-compliant version of FaceTime or a HIPAA-compliant version of Zoom, and just getting a few people out there and saying, hey, would you see a doctor online? Here's a Zoom link. It's HIPAA-compliant. Let me try this out. So maybe it's physical therapy or a dietitian who wants to start an online diet program. Now, at this point, all this is moot because everybody and their uncle is doing telemedicine. But in 2010, I would have been smarter to start it using a very small sample of folks and people, which I kind of did by accident. I had 30 state licenses, so I was a doctor du jour for 30 states of people who were calling, day and night trying to get help online.
Well, let me ask you this question now. Now that you know what you know now, right? I want to ask you this question for the docs who are listening, people who want to jump into the field of entrepreneurship. So if you understood what you understand right now, but let's say you didn't have the funding and you definitely didn't have the networking, what is the first steps that you would take to make your business idea very successful? So I'm talking about like, how would you get your business idea to scale? How would you manage even your schedule with trying to make sure that you can grow this business properly?
So it obviously is a little dependent or a lot dependent on the business, but I would outline what I'd find a problem for which does not have a workable solution that they know of, and see if the problem is expensive to fix, if a lot of people have it, and it's recurring. And if it answers those questions, that's great. Now all of a sudden you come up with a solution for it, and maybe a solution is amenable to one where you can test it out on a few people. Whether, hey, do you like this idea? Here's what I'm going to. Or you actually build a small sample of the solution and see if it works. And if it does, great, continue. If it doesn't, okay, no problem. Iterate, change it a little bit, pivot. And then, again, try to rescale it with going out there to a narrow population of folks and see if there's some acceptability. And then if there is, you likely have something. And then start backing off on your clinical practice and, moving forward with your entrepreneurial efforts.
So how do you, when you're just starting a business or when you start a business, how do you know how much of an investment, how much capital that you should be putting in? And that capital could be how often you're working clinically, right? So your time versus even financially. How do you know that?
So I'm in the process of starting the venture capital fund right now. So we're just getting this off the ground.
You are a busy guy, man.
Absolutely. But I've always wanted to do this, and I love helping entrepreneurs, particularly physician entrepreneurs. And so what we'll look for is people who have their own skin in the game, both time and money, that they come with a solution to a problem that's a significant problem, and one that we think has scalability and a clear path to exit. So if I was starting out again, what I would encourage them to do is write down the problem, write down their solution, build a prototype if that's the case, or build the app if that's the case, and then try that app out, and then start figuring out what the potential market demand is, and then going out and trying to raise capital. Now, I was fortunate for a lot of these. I triple mortgaged my house, and
Are you serious?
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right.
Oh yeah.
See, we like this stuff because these are the things this is the glamorous stuff that people don't talk about, right? So I like this. Okay.
Well, it was, retrospectively, it was quite stupid to do that because I really
But it
did bet
worked.
the house on it. I got a little better after that. But, I had to sell a helicopter to make payroll one time. I mean, all the crazy things you do to get a business up and running. But if you have a product, if you have an idea,
Wait, I'm trying to figure, is that a flex or like that's really dope though? Like you sold a helicopter just to make payroll. Wow.
Yeah, I was commuting back and forth to this hospital in a helicopter like 5 days a week because it was about an hour and 20-minute drive, but the helicopter was 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and I couldn't make payroll, and so I got this pure by luck, and I loved this helicopter. It was an old Magnum PI look helicopter.
Yeah.
And just by pure luck and timing, way back in the day, I paid $150,000 for it, and somebody came in and said, "I'll buy it for $250," and payroll was on Friday. This was a Wednesday. I had no way to make payroll. I'm like, sold.
Wow. Did you buy it back? This is the red one, right? Because I watched Magnum PI.
This is a black one with paint spots all over it.
Okay, but it was the smaller one because I remember the TV show. The smaller one with
it looked like that. Yes.
Yeah.
So it was same. It was the same helicopter with black. It was black with paint spots all over it. It was a cool helicopter.
Did you buy it back? That's the question, though, because you've been really successful since then.
I've actually looked for it. It's probably still out there, but it was old when I bought it, so it's got to be really old now. But so I would push forward on that, and then if you have a solution or an app or a product, go out and raise money. I mean, there's probably no better time to go out to angel investor networks or come and talk to me if ready for venture capital.
Okay. All right. Well, look, we're going to get your contact information at the end, but I do have a question. So I've gone to the websites of the companies that you started, did a little bit of some internet stalking. There are not many physicians on there with you. You're mainly the physician there. So I got a question. So when people are starting their business, and let's say they do everything you say, they get to an MVP or they get to a point where, the business is really, they're at a point where they're trying to decide, well, this side business really should be my full-time business, but I need someone to help me scale. How do you get that connection, right, with someone who can take you to the next level? Are you looking for other physicians to connect with? Or how are you finding a professional or a CMO or a CEO to help you at that point?
So that's a great question. So when I started NextCare, there were two other physicians. One bailed after about 3 weeks because no patients came in the doors for a while. And the other guy said, and it was, close friend to this day, said, "This is great. I'm doing this one time because it's freaking me out."
Okay.
And so neither of them were probably the right. Well, Jim was a great guy, and he helped a long time. But I think when you go out and try to pick somebody, we all tend to pick people like ourselves. Two emergency medicine docs, two surgeons. But what you really need to find is someone who thinks different with a different skill set than you have. And so finding those people are just simple networking events. I do a lot of LinkedIn stalking for people, even today, that I want to hire who fit a skill set, and then I'll track them down and try to interview them and chat with them. I've been doing this for the Venture Capital Fund. But I think finding somebody with something that you don't have to offer, there's that old saying, if two people think alike, you don't need one of them. And so if you're great on vision and execution and strategy, and the other person, she's great on finances and fundraising, great, you've got a team.
Got it. I like that. That's a really great answer because I think a lot of docs, they look for other doctors possibly, or they just don't know who to look for, where to look for to scale. So this is great. Listen, we're at the end, but can you tell people about your book that you can find right now on Amazon as well as your podcast?
Sure. So if you go to my website, it's johnschufeldmd.com, and there's no C in my name, which everybody, including me, still puts it in there. You can get the book and the podcast. And on the podcast, I interview physician entrepreneurs, and literally to a person, I end these podcasts, and I am more enthusiastic than ever about our specialty or about our profession. And two, what folks are doing, because it's some really cool stuff people are doing out there. And you will learn a lot about their mistakes and things they would have done different and all the great fun times they had while doing it.
Yeah, I definitely feel I have to assume that the world is, or at least the entrepreneurial world is way more welcoming now for physicians than it was for you 30 years ago. So I'm sure you're like, it's just a different world right now.
It's a blast, and it's a blast.
Well, Dr. John Shufelt, thank you so much for coming on Docs Outside the Box. Everyone who's listening, all of those links from his book, as well as to his podcast, all that stuff will be in the show notes. Thanks again, Dr. John.
Thank you. A pleasure.
All right, so that is a wrap. That was an episode, once again, guys, with Dr. John Shufelt. We talked about Tribal EM, which is a staffing agency, locums agency in indigenous property, indigenous land, reservations. And then we also talked about how to start a business with an idea and then get the right people on board to help you kind of scale that business so that can be uber successful like he's created in the past. So what are some of your takeaways from this episode?
Man, first of all, I was not expecting that. Like, this episode was chock full of just a lot of different things, just from the business, the mission, just all of it. But, for me, it kind of reminded me, he mentioned Idaho, actually, and I used to live in Idaho, and I was doing
I remember those
locums
days.
out. Yeah, I was doing locums out in Idaho, and we had a number of Native American patients. I wasn't on a reservation or, reserved land, but I do know that, one of the things that he mentioned is that he called Native Americans our forebearers, basically meaning that, they lived on this land first, and that he felt, obligated to be able to do this service, to provide this service because, of the circumstance under which, they currently live on reservations. It just really sounded like it was very mission oriented, and that he really is looking for a way to at least do his part to help, right some wrongs and improve some circumstances, if you will. That's probably the best way that I can put it. My other takeaway, though, is that, he talked about, bringing your A game as a physician. Like, you can't come in there talking about, well, I need this CT scan, I need this ultrasound, I need this MRI.
That was one of my biggest takeaways also.
Yeah, exactly. They may not have the CT scan. They may not have the MRI. So, get down and dirty in your clinical skills.
Yeah.
And, don't skimp. Don't skimp. Go back to your basics, which is basically what we should be doing anyway. It doesn't matter if you have a CT scan or MRI.
But that just lets you know that disconnect sometimes between medical training, actual training versus what's really happening in the streets, in the trenches, whichever way you want to describe it. I think and I guess 10 years in now, I have to admit, we are relying a lot on lab findings. We're relying a lot on CT scans and other diagnostic imaging to make a final diagnosis when you already have the clinical exam already. Mm-hmm. I get it. And I agree with you there. Like, you have to bring your A game. You have to be ready you don't have to be perfect, but you have to be able to trust your clinical skills and your clinical diagnostic skills. So I agree with you there.
Yeah. Now, just like when we go to Ghana.
Right. It's the very similar experience. Like, you don't have all of these different modalities and tests to back up what you already think is happening already. Mm-hmm. Right. I think that's the key thing here. Yeah. Now, not to kind of underscore what you've already said, I'm just going to move on because I had those same takeaways. The other two takeaways I had is just serial entrepreneurship. And he was talking about some of us have an idea and we talk ourselves out of this idea. Yes. Right. You talk yourself out of an idea. And you never know. You might be sitting on the next great invention, the next great, whatever it may be, solution to solve X, Y, and Z issue out there. And it really is just taking an idea and just kind of iterating on it and making it better and then finding people who can help you. Because I'm going to bring this up. You know me, I love Martin. But you remember that episode where Cole was talking about Renum spoons and stuff, right?
Like Renum spoons.
Right, Renum spoons. Like literally renting out spoons is such a bad idea. But like, is it really? right? Or did it have bad execution? So I think the concept that he brought up was bad idea versus bad execution.
Right.
And these are the two things that I talked about. Like, we have these ideas in our head all the time. We talk ourselves out of it. We talk ourselves out of taking it to the next level. And then also at the same time, like, we just don't have the execution.
Right.
To take these ideas or solutions to something that can really help the population at large. So this is something that I think we all should kind of think about. The reason why I had him on this show is just literally to have this spark this kind of curiosity in all of us to be like, if he can do it, why can't I do it?
Why can't I? That's right.
So
that's right. Yeah. I mean, because when you think about it, at one point he was a pre-med, he was a medical student, he was a resident, he became an attending, and he just kind of did these things because they were on his mind.
Yeah, and the other thing that he mentioned is there are several other ideas that he came up with that failed.
Right, that failed. And he was not afraid to try. He was not afraid to try. And I think that that's a valuable lesson for anybody who's listening, is that you shouldn't be afraid to try because you think that you might fail. The not trying is actually the failure. Right? Like that's actually the failure, is in not trying. So, try, see what you can come up with. He mentioned also, which I thought was interesting, especially for any of the physicians out there, or other professionals out there, he's, starting up a venture capitalist fund. And he even said, like, hey, contact me, contact him. The worst he could say is no. The worst his group could say is no. And you didn't have it anyway, so what you care?
All of his contact information is in the show notes, so make sure you guys go and check it out. He has a podcast that is very interesting. He has a book that just came out that's very interesting. I want you guys to all check that out in the show notes. The links are all there for you to connect with his podcast as well as check out his book. And I'm going to let you have the last comment, or leave it at that as the last comment. But listen, everyone, this is once again another episode of Docs Outside the Box. We really appreciate everybody listening. Now, listen, also, don't forget, we want to hear from you. Make sure you check out and fill out the Docs Outside the Box podcast survey. That link is in the show notes. Anything that you want to let us know, anything that you want us to improve on, or anything you just want to tell us, hey, y'all doing a good job, and give us a pat on the back, we really appreciate that. So, listen, we're going to catch you guys on the next episode. Dr. Renee, you want to say peace?
Peace.
See y'all later. Peace.